Good afternoon, my name is Josh from CyclonesOZ, and here is your detailed afternoon update on Tropical Cyclone Alfred, developing very nicely offshore from Queensland at this time. This is an extremely dangerous situation for the southeast corner of Queensland and the northeast corner of New South Wales, with Category 2 strength Tropical Cyclone Alfred expected to make landfall in the next 40 hours now, just around the Brisbane area. This is a significant tropical cyclone update, lots of information to come, so make sure you are subscribed and stick around to the end of the video to make sure you are fully informed with what Alfred is expected to do to the southeastern parts of Queensland. Let's jump straight into the forecast right now. You can see Tropical Cyclone Alfred offshore as a very nice tropical cyclone. It's definitely Category 2 status right now. It's organising itself quite significantly as well. And as you can see over the last 6 hours, lots of rainfall now coming onto the Brisbane and the Gold Coast radar stations. You can see heaps of heavy force now extending up on the western side of the storm, but again, the southern side dominating this storm in terms of the strong winds and the most significant impacts here. A lot of convection and a lot of thunderstorms now also beginning to develop around the thunderstorm, and they're shown best on the infrared satellite imagery, which you can see right now. Intense thunderstorms being reported around the southern side of this system here, so it's certainly quite a nicely intensifying tropical cyclone at this time. And even though it doesn't look like a full-blown tropical cyclone, it's certainly got some good thunderstorm and some good convection now wrapping around on the southern side, which is a strong indication of intensification. Now, when I say developing nicely, of course, obviously, I'm not rooting for this tropical cyclone. I'm not by any means saying that this is a good situation for Queensland. I'm just saying that from this tropical cyclone's perspective, it is doing a very good job at intensifying right now. And again, a very scary prospect for Queensland. That's enough chat on what's happening right now in the tropical cyclone. You can see wind observations on the Queensland, the New South Wales coastline really beginning to pick up right now. And as you can see, as those rain showers and bands start to make themselves or cross the coastline, you can see wind observations here at Cape Byron weather station, 76 kilometres an hour out of the south, gusts up to 100 kilometres an hour through there. Winds between 40 and 60 kilometres an hour along the Gold Coast and into Surfers Paradise. Winds up to about 50 or 60 kilometres an hour around the Brisbane airport area, in fact pushing 70 kilometres an hour, and stronger winds along Strabroke Island and up towards Moreton Island as well. These winds will only continue to pick up throughout the remainder of today. Let's jump into the forecast part of this tropical cyclone right now. You can see located pretty close to the Queensland coastline. It's actually quite a bit closer than what the forecast models are currently indicating right now. So this tropical cyclone really moving closer towards Queensland, which is pushing the landfall time ahead by a couple of hours at this time. We can see the tropical cyclone is expected to slow down in its forward motion though and actually take a bit of a turn towards the north. It's wobbling around quite a little bit here, which makes the landfall location a little bit uncertain at this time, but we're still definitely ironing out the details, and we will continue to do those over the next couple of hours. And then pushing the forecast in towards tonight, we're expecting full-blown cyclonic conditions to begin unfolding along the southeastern corner of Queensland and into the northeastern parts of New South Wales, including locations between Brisbane down towards Lismore or the Lismore coastline there, which will include Byron Bay, Cape Byron, Tweed Heads, Burleigh Heads, the Gold Coast, Coomera, Sanctuary Cove, and then up towards Strabroke Islands as well. Cyclonic conditions expected to begin developing on those locations from later on tonight, with full-blown tropical cyclone conditions expected to extend up towards the Brisbane metro area by around lunchtime tomorrow. Conditions rapidly deteriorating around the Gold Coast from about lunchtime tomorrow. So at the absolute latest, you want your final preparations in your house fully prepared from the inside out by later on tonight, and final preparations on the inside part of your house completed by tomorrow morning, because by tomorrow morning, especially around the Gold Coast area, this tropical cyclone will be in the process of crossing the coast. Again, like I said, a very slow moving tropical cyclone. It's going to be wobbling around quite a bit as well, so there's not too much pushing this tropical cyclone around. It's only going to have that forward motion of about 10 to 15 kilometres an hour, which is very slow for a tropical cyclone, even for Queensland, before making that landfall on Strabroke Island at about 9 or 10 o'clock local time as per the latest forecast model guidance. Again, that's in line with other major forecast models as well. The GFS forecast model yet to update, but you can see again that landfall time at about 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning. The Icon forecast model marginally earlier and marginally further towards the south, but at this point it's looking pretty much rock solid certain that we're going to see a landfall here on South Strabroke Island. It's a very likely situation now that that's where the landfall site is going to happen. About 90% chance that the landfall will occur on Strabroke Island or South Strabroke Island at this point, which will take the storm's destructive core inland towards Coomera and Sanctuary Cove, and then further inland out towards Boonah and Bow Desert. And of course, as we've been talking about over the last couple of days, the most significant conditions from this tropical cyclone, which we'll delve into in the impacts part of this video in just a few moments, are being felt on the southern side. They have recently wrapped around onto the western side of the system, so the initial impact from this tropical cyclone will be the most intense, which means conditions will rapidly deteriorate through tonight and into tomorrow morning, and then again continue deteriorating through Thursday and in towards Friday as well, with the most significant conditions being felt later Thursday night into early Friday morning. And then the backside of this tropical cyclone and the northern side of this tropical cyclone will be comparatively much weaker. Still though, by the looks of things, this tropical cyclone has wrapped itself around a little bit more to the west, which means that the Brisbane metro area, it's very good that those suburbs have been prepared for a tropical cyclone impact. We didn't really expect this to be happening, especially as if you can see on the forecast models right now, they've initialized this tropical cyclone with the most significant impacts being on the southern side, and in reality they've now wrapped themselves across the southwest and even the western side. And whilst this tropical cyclone is still about 2 days away from landfall, effectively speaking, and there's still plenty of room for this tropical cyclone to develop and keep spinning those conditions around its destructive core, it definitely looks like the southwestern side of this tropical cyclone is now going to be the most powerful, which doesn't change things to the Gold Coast and into the northeastern parts of New South Wales. They're still expecting to be absolutely throttled by this tropical cyclone, but it's a good thing that those in the Brisbane area, especially in the southern suburbs of Brisbane, have prepared for a full-blown Category 2 strength tropical cyclone impact. It's very important that they have an imperative that you continue your preparations there until you are fully ready for winds up to 130 kilometres an hour through every suburb around Brisbane and north towards Coomera, because at this point it does look like the forecast has shifted a tiny bit to favour this tropical cyclone being a little bit more dominated on the western side than what we have expected, and that means that the conditions will actually be worse than thought this morning for the Brisbane metro area. And it's these little details that mean a lot in a tropical cyclone landfall forecast that we need to be talking about frequently throughout the day. So keep checking in with the Bureau of Meteorology and keep checking in with your favourite forecasters and the most accurate forecasters on YouTube and Facebook, just to get a feel of what's expected with this tropical cyclone, because there are tiny changes happening throughout the course of the day. Now, the forecast is suggesting that this tropical cyclone is actually going to stall along the southeastern parts of Queensland, and this is a disaster for rainfall. You can see it's going to be very slow moving through Friday night into Saturday morning, and whilst it will weaken below tropical cyclone status very quickly once it's made landfall, you can see between all major forecast models, and especially the Bureau of Meteorology as well, calling for that stalling motion from this tropical cyclone here, very slow moving indeed as we get through Friday and in towards Saturday. That leads me nicely on into the impacts part of this video, where rainfall is going to be a massive problem from this tropical cyclone. We'll get to the rainfall forecast in just a moment. I would just like to briefly talk about what winds we can expect along the coastline, and again what winds we can expect in your location as well. So this is a map that includes wind accumulation, so this includes the strongest wind gust for the selected period of time, which is out towards Saturday night. Keep in mind this tropical cyclone's winds will be at their strongest along the Queensland coastline through Thursday afternoon and evening and into early Friday morning. Beyond that, those winds will begin to deteriorate. And I feel like the Icon forecast model is once again the most accurate forecast for this tropical cyclone's wind speeds right now, because it is calling for that landfall and the southern and the southwestern side being the most dominant side of this tropical cyclone, give or take. So this is the forecast model that we're going to be using for this forecast. You can see along the Sunshine Coast, because we're not going to be seeing too much in the way of significant conditions up there, anywhere north of Coomera can really only expect a brief period of cyclonic wind gusts, with damaging wind gusts there up to about 90 kilometres an hour possible across coastal and exposed locations. But wind gusts north of Maroochydore, it really won't feel like a tropical cyclone. It will still be quite significant as you get around the coastline, certainly will feel quite blowy, but I reckon the cyclone warning north of Coomera is more of a precaution as opposed to an actual legitimate warning at this point. I reckon those around Bribie Island, and especially north of Bribie Island, don't really have anything to worry about in regards to Tropical Cyclone Alfred. Now, the Brisbane metro area could be seeing wind gusts anywhere between 100 up to 130 kilometres an hour, with the strongest wind gusts expected in exposed and, again, coastal locations around the Brisbane airport area. I'm expecting wind gusts there as this tropical cyclone makes landfall around the Brisbane port and the Brisbane airport to be up to 150 kilometres an hour, in fact, just considering the fact that this tropical cyclone is actually shaping up to be slightly stronger than initially expected, and a Category 2 strength tropical cyclone will bring ashore the risk of wind gusts up to 150 kilometres an hour. Same deal for Moreton Island, Strabroke Islands, especially the north and the south one, specifically the south one actually where the landfall is expected to take place. Wind gusts pretty much assured to be stronger than 140 kilometres an hour there, with peak gusts up to 150, even stronger up to 155 kilometres an hour is expected, so some really significant damage can be expected there. And then inland in towards the Brisbane metro area, like I said, 100 to 130 kilometre an hour wind gusts. The southern suburbs of Brisbane could be pushing closer to 140 kilometres an hour, especially around the Logan City sort of area, and even out towards Ipswich as well. Wind gusts could be as high as 150 kilometres an hour, sweeping down from the valleys around Boona and Bow Desert. The wind gusts could get quite gnarly into the Ipswich area. I mean 130 kilometres an hour, not up to 150 kilometres an hour. The further inland you get, the weaker those wind gusts will be. Keep in mind that 90 to 100 kilometres an hour, that's no real problem for the majority of homes in the southeastern corner of Queensland. It's kind of when you're talking about sustained periods of destructive wind gusts in excess of 125 kilometres kilometers an hour, which for the most part is going to be exclusively for very exposed and also those coastal locations where we're talking about significant problems. And generally speaking, in those locations, the homes are slightly more well built. So whilst we are talking about winds that could flatten the average home in Brisbane, they're kind of only going to be exclusive to those exposed locations. And that doesn't take away from the fact that we're still expecting very significant property damage, roof failures, power line downings, and trees just being chopped down everywhere as a result of the tropical cyclone's winds and the destructive core of this system. It's probably not going to be as bad as an all-out apocalypse over Brisbane and the Gold Coast. Wind gusts down on the Gold Coast, though, will be well in excess of what the forecast is suggesting right now. We could be seeing peak wind gusts along the coastline up to about 130 to 140 kilometres an hour. Tweed Heads as well, wind gusts up to about 140 kilometres an hour there. The entire canal network around the Gold Coast will be looking at winds between 120 and 140 kilometres an hour, and then pushing further south, and that very strong winds expected between Tweed Heads down towards Ballina, including Byron Bay, where peak wind gusts could be in excess of 130 to 140 kilometres an hour down there as well. And considering that the winds are already blowing up to about 70 to 80 kilometres an hour there, sustained at Cape Byron, with stronger wind gusts up to about 95 to 100 kilometres an hour, we could be seeing wind gusts there max out at about 150 kilometres an hour. So again, very strong wind gusts expected around Byron Bay and Tweed Heads. Same deal with Burleigh Heads as well, and then south towards Ballina. Then the winds should be less destructive anywhere further south of Ballina. Again, exposed and very much elevated locations into the mountainous regions around the Queensland-New South Wales border, around Springbrook National Park. And that sort of area, winds could peak out at about 130 kilometres an hour, but anywhere further south of Ballina along the coastline, winds should be between 90 up to about 110 kilometres an hour. Not as destructive, but certainly could cause some significant tree downings and some significant power line failures as well, and the chance of roof failures in very exposed and elevated locations as well. But yeah, certainly some significant winds can be expected. Rainfall as well, that's a long wind forecast. Let's talk about rainfall right now. Over the next 3 days, some very significant rainfall accumulations are possible, and they're again reciprocated between all major forecast models. Brisbane expecting about 150 millimetres, the Gold Coast expecting up to 400 millimetres of intense rainfall that will fall in a very quick period of time through this tropical cyclone's landfall process, beginning tomorrow morning. Expecting heavy falls to extend right down the New South Wales coastline as well, with falls averaging 200 to 400 millimetres along the coastline as far south as Forster and Taree, with falls peaking at about 500 millimetres inland from Coffs Harbour around Ebor, that sort of area there, and falls up to about 300 millimetres possible around the Barrington Tops. Back up to Queensland, falls inland or in the Gold Coast hinterland could be anywhere between 3 to 700 millimetres of rainfall, with isolated spot falls depending on how slow moving the tropical cyclone is, which we're not 100% sure of how slow moving it will be, with spot rainfall accumulations up to 1,000 millimetres possible over the next 5 days. Falls averaging 3 to 700 millimetres expected throughout much of the Gold Coast hinterland, then further south into the New South Wales side of things, south of Murray-Willumbah, and then down towards Byron Bay. Lismore as well should be seeing about 400 millimetres, which will obviously cause some really significant flooding there. Further north up towards Brisbane, like I said, around the 200 millimetre mark, a lot of that rainfall will be more steady stuff coming through over the next 24 hours, and then the heavier falls coming through from the tropical cyclone's landfall, which will still give way to a 6-hour period where rainfall accumulations could be up to 150 millimetres in the Brisbane metro area, which will cause some significant flash flooding. Higher falls expected further south into the southern suburbs, which could be as high as about 250 millimetres there. Anywhere further north of Brisbane, the rainfall accumulations will drop off pretty quickly. Caboolture expecting about 100 millimetres, and then up towards Mooloolaba, Maroochydore and Noosa falls between 50 and 80 millimetres expected up there, with very little rainfall expected further north of Noosa. So again, with this system being a southern dominated system here, plenty of rainfall further south of where the landfall site is going to be and into the Gold Coast hinterland and the northeastern corner of New South Wales. And to be honest, this is a worst case scenario for the landfall site being on Strabroke Island. For the rainfall side of things, I mean, this will bring the absolute heaviest of rainfall down into historically very wet locations that flood very easily, explicitly for Lismore and that sort of area. Some really significant flooding possible in those areas, and I'll get to the forecast for that in just a few moments. So yeah, this is definitely a worst case scenario to sort of forecast here for this sort of part of Queensland into New South Wales. Another impact from this tropical cyclone is the significant wave height. You can see right now around the low pressure system, waves pushing 8 to 9 metres in height, and in fact they're increasing in height as well. And as we push this forecast forward, as this tropical cyclone approaches the coastline, peak wave heights will begin to really quickly ramp up around the Gold Coast area along Surfers Paradise, and then into the northeastern parts of New South Wales along the coastline there south to Yamba. Wave heights expected to max out at about 7 metres later on tonight, with significant swell and storm surge beginning to build as well. Storm surge will begin to pile on, with the highest tides expected on Thursday and out towards Friday morning as well, with a peak storm surge up to about 3 metres above the highest astronomical tide possible into the northeastern corner of New South Wales, and about 2 to 2.5 metres possible around the Surfers Paradise into the Gold Coast. And whilst a storm surge of about 2.5 metres won't cause life-threatening flash flooding and major property inundation around the Gold Coast, especially around the canals, which we have been concerned about for the last couple of days, with that being the majority of homes raised about 3 or 4 metres above the water level there, which is very good news indeed. It will cause significant damage to boats in the area as well, just with the rough seas that are expected. So if you do have a boat that can get itself out in a trailer, I strongly recommend doing that throughout the course of today. Again, keep in mind those boat ramps are going to be full and you want to be off the roads and into your safe space by later on tonight, because this tropical cyclone is rapidly approaching the Queensland coastline. But significant coastal inundation doesn't look awfully likely or awfully problematic at this time, considering with that storm surge being about 2 metres above the highest astronomical tide. That's not catastrophic for Queensland. It will still cause problems, but it's not absolutely disastrous. But keep in mind, once you throw waves on top of that, which could be 5 or 6 metres along the coastline around Surfers Paradise, we'd be seeing some massive waves and some significant coastal erosion around Surfers Paradise, and for the entirety of Strabroke Island as well, down to Tweed Heads, down to Byron Bay, and even further south down through Ballina. And significant wave heights and coastal erosion expected much further south than that as well, with big swells expected right down towards Sydney and Newcastle, with wave heights there averaging between 3 and 4 metres as far south as Sydney. So again, coastal hazard warnings in place as far south as Sydney, and rightfully so, considering the impacts from this tropical cyclone are going to be very large and very widespread. But yeah, in terms of preparations for this tropical cyclone, you need to be rounding them up right now. I mean, this tropical cyclone is approaching the coastline quite slowly, but it is very close to the coastline right now, and conditions are now beginning to really rapidly deteriorate across the Queensland coastline. I imagine a lot of people really beginning to feel it at this time. If you've got any footage, please do send it through to me over on Messenger as well. I'd be more than happy to take a look at it. This is a really significant tropical cyclone, and all of the footage that I've been sent so far has really helped me in understanding how significant of an impact this is going to be. Make sure you've got your house ready for a tropical cyclone impact. If you live in the kind of black zone around Brisbane, the Gold Coast, and then south, especially along the northeastern corner of New South Wales in very exposed locations, then extending up through the Gold Coast and onto Strabroke Island as well, Coomera and Sanctuary Cove, make sure you've got plywood up around the windows just to prevent them from shattering and your house becoming a kind of a wind tunnel, I guess. Make sure you're all bunkered down in an interior room in the house, whether that's a living room. I reckon a bathroom would probably be overkill unless you live in a demountable or a very poorly built home that could be very old. Make sure you are ready for this tropical cyclone impact. You've got your water ready, your food ready, because it is going to be a very nasty impact. Also, with this cyclone warning, you need to be off the roads by tonight. Sunset tonight is, I believe, the curfew. I don't think it's an official curfew, but you should definitely be off the roads by sunset tonight, and those preparations must be completed today. It's definitely way too late to begin pruning the garden now. If that's not done, it's way too hazardous to do so, considering the winds are now really beginning to pick up around Surfers Paradise, the Gold Coast, and right through the Brisbane metro area. I mean, we're seeing with these wind observations here sustained, pushing 40 to 50 kilometres an hour, with the much stronger gusts around the Brisbane and the Gold Coast area. If it is slightly calmer in your location, especially if you are a little bit further inland and into some of the mountainous areas into New South Wales and Queensland, if it is a little bit calmer, you can definitely do that around your property right now, but make sure it's professionally done. This is a very, very hazardous time right now, and Queensland is about to get absolutely smashed by Tropical Cyclone Alfred. I cannot stress this enough, that it is an unprecedented weather event. And make sure you've got your water ready, plenty of stuff ready, and entertainment ready for this tropical cyclone. It's going to be a significant impact for the southeast of Queensland. If you are planning on evacuating right now, even though there's no official evacuation orders as far as I'm aware of around the Gold Coast especially, if you do live in a very flood-prone area, including around the rivers, which are expected to reach moderate to major flooding levels, especially across the northern river section of New South Wales. Lismore specifically is a town that's throwing up red flags, but those along the Coomera and the Nerang rivers as well, if you live in a flood-prone area, especially further upstream, which is at a risk of flash flooding and riverine flooding as Alfred crosses the coastline. If you have the means to evacuate and you can safely get to a higher location around Brisbane or further inland out towards Toowoomba, I strongly recommend doing so, but you have to leave now. I cannot stress that enough. This tropical cyclone will be ashore very quickly, and like I said, those conditions rapidly deteriorating already, and you want to be off the roads by sunset tonight, so you've only got a couple of hours left before this tropical cyclone is fully on top of you. Anyways, that is all that I have time for this afternoon on Tropical Cyclone Alfred. It's certainly a powerful tropical cyclone, putting itself together really nicely right now. As we zoom out and take a look at Queensland and New South Wales, it is a daunting picture, that's for sure. A very scary picture for Queensland and New South Wales. It's a historic weather event in the making, that's for sure. Stay safe and stay calm. I'm not using these forecasts to incite panic. I'm just trying to emphasize how significant this weather event is here from Tropical Cyclone Alfred. It is a monster of a storm, and it is unlike anything the southeast of Queensland and the northeast of New South Wales have ever received before, with those winds, like I said, up to 150 kilometres an hour expected. There will be an update in a few hours as well on this tropical cyclone, just to hammer home any last minute changes in the forecast and what this tropical cyclone is doing. So again, make sure you do stick around for that as well. There's no better way to be informed than by subscribing to the CyclonesOZ channel as well. And a special shout out to the channel sponsors. Their names are on screen right now. I could not run the show without them. And to all of the recent new supporters, subscribers, channel members, and all of those, their support has been unbelievable. And I cannot thank everybody who's been watching, sharing, and subscribing enough on this channel. But that is all from me this afternoon, and I'll catch you all in the next storm. Goodbye.